Wow. Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, how exciting. This is great. How's that mic? All right? So what I want to do on this podcast is talk about, as I said, is creative consistency and what it is about working together to make stuff. And I know, as my dad, and I've known you all my life, that you have done that your entire life. So I thought this would be an amazing opportunity to really capture and talk about your experience in the creative world. Where would you like to start?
I think it starts right at the beginning. I mean, I idolise what my father did, from a very early age.
Your father was a caterer?
My father was a caterer to the film industry. And that's all I ever wanted to do. I left school very early and I wanted to work with him or learn the business. I'd grown up with lots of people within the film industry and been out on many film sets as a child. So I was not averse to having a conversation with people or asking a question. But I started as a T-boy and I still am the T-boy. That's the way I look at it, because I think you learn far more by looking and watching and occasionally ask why.
Did you feel you could ask why?
Up to a point in my life, I didn't have a nerve in me. I've been trying, as I've got older, trying to work out why I got quite nervous about doing or saying things. But I think that's much later in my life and maybe a bit of a breakdown. But that's something, there's a big life, there's a lot of life, prior to any of that. And that's for another day.
Yeah.
But I remember going to places like Booker Airfield at a very young age, travelling down the A40 in the middle of the night to arrive at an airfield, which was then called Booker Airfield. I think it's now called something else, near High Wycombe, and watching, to my amazement, the first aeroplanes I think ever built, flying around or on the ground, because some of them were make-believe, on a film called Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines. And boy, did that turn your brain. This went on for weeks in my primary school summer holiday. And I stood there meeting some very strange people who called each other Love and Ducky, because there was the London crowd. The Phil Hobbs of the future was blasted at me from every angle, from every crowd artist who'd known my father most of their lives.
Because your dad was called Phil.
Because my father was called Phil and I'm called Phil. Anyway, wonderful experience. Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines was a wonderful film to grind your teeth on. But I must have served 1,000, 2,000, there was 5,000 crowd on that film on some days.
Wow.
And we served them from breakfast through morning break in those days to lunch and to afternoon tea every day for weeks. And they're big crowds. And that's thrown in at the deep end.
And you were how old?
I think Magnificent, I've got to work, I don't quite know the date of it, I'm afraid, but it's early 60s. And which would have made me 8 or 10, no, about 10.
Wow. And that was the beginning?
Well, that was the time I thought, boy, I've got to have more of this.
What did you like about it?
It's the buzz. It was a complete buzz. Look, for any child born in the 50s, the world was a slightly different place. as it is from today. And the old person or old middle-aged person will tell you that. But, you know, I'm not saying the world isn't as good as it was, but the filmmaking was old-fashioned. And the people were old-fashioned. And we were...
Compared to today?
Compared to today. But you have look, I was the tea boy, and I say I still am the tea boy. You want a conversation with somebody, you make them a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. I've had some very funny experiences in taking somebody tea or coffee at a young age or an older age. It's how you meet people, especially in the film industry, especially when they're working for a director who's a complete monster or a producer who's just told them off. Give them a cup of tea. Make them feel at home. It doesn't matter who it is. I mean, they can be grumpy, or they can be extraordinarily charming.
Because hungry and people get uncomfortable when they're hungry and dehydrated.
I was always told, if you're going to do this, I mean, it's the key to making things work then. I don't know if it's so much now. Is you got to keep that camera moving. Turning over, and it's, you've got all the people that are at one side of the camera, and without them you don't make the film, and that's what costs money. It stops, but they got to be fed, and that's how film catering comes about. It's not some spell they're fed all the time, or there's all these people standing around a kitchen waiting for their food. Yes, they've all got their job. It is a team. But it's very important that you look after everybody. And the most important people are the people behind the camera. And they stop working because the food's no good, or they haven't had a cup of tea, or they haven't had a break for a time.
And then it all just falls to bits.
It falls apart. And it gets very disgruntled. And I've been pulled in to take over from people on a few occasions in my life because they can't do it. And it's basically feed the camera.
That was the expression, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, that's something also for the future. But feed the camera is what I was told. And it's very strange. I went round the world feeding the camera. I believe there are a lot of people who do it now and do a very good job. But the importance seems to me isn't the important. Sorry, the strange part about it is the onus is on. It's got to be absolutely gourmet. This and everything is this, that, and the other, and it's all about the food. And we were all about the food, but the simple, best quality you could ever buy. Okay, great choice, lots of it, kept people happy. You try to get too clever, the camera stops.
How did you make it happen?
I was taught early days. I watched my father and I listened about what my father did and the films he worked on. I mean, he worked on films. He did David Lean films and many other people's films as a caterer all over the world. But basically him going and setting things up. He was very clever. He knew how to find things. His company started because he had a wartime friend, stroke partner, who was disabled from the war. And disabled people at the end of the war could get a license to buy food. The rationing, you've got to remember, carried on until mid-50s in England. So everybody had ration books. But if you wanted to buy food, you couldn't do it unless you had a special license. So my father and his pal who had the license, my father raised the money to buy an old canteen and the rights to feed people on Hampstead Heath and one other site just on where the M1 is now, Scratchwood. And that's how he started. And when he was one day working at Scratch Wood selling sandwiches or whatever it was. A man called Dennis Holt, who was a well-known productions manager stroke producer in his later life, came along and introduced himself, and someone vaguely knew my father from his antics in the war, and said, would you do me a favour? Would you come and feed a film unit? Dad said yes, and he was making a film at ABPC in Elstree, Boreham Wood, and at that time there were many film studios in Boreham Wood, and a lot of the location work was done at Scratch Wood in the woods or in the old villages around Elstree, and Dad started working feeding film units. And it grew from there. I mean, a year later, he had several kitchens feeding film units. He was pretty quick to catch the time and the nature of the work. And he had a very mixed situation. But he did films. That's in 1946 he started. It was only a year after the war. And he did things that people couldn't believe where he got the food from. Not everybody knew that, you know, if you had a disability, you get a food license to buy and sell food. So he got a name, and he knew how to buy food. How he knew, I don't know. I never worked out how he got. Well, he worked at the Ritz. The only job he ever had before the war. I think he was a stores just a storeman at the Ritz Hotel. Wow. That's the only place he ever worked. And the army, where he was a glider pilot, and then he started this business. And he was lent £2,000 by the husband of a cousin of his who was quite a wealthy farmer. And I think Ken Hobbs, his name, who was Ken Hobbs, lent him the money because he adored my father and said, you know, do what you need, get on with what you want to do. And you've got to remember, my father was 20 at that time. He invested the money, and a year later he paid it back and gave Ken Hobbs a present of a whiskey flask to Ken, thanks for the chance, Phil. And I still have that.
Wow.
But anyway, that's how it all started. But my father used to work, he did David Lean's films. And he did a lot of Gaumont films as well when it was open, early days, I believe. And then he started travelling, and he did films like Bridge Over the River Kwai for David, as well as Oliver Twist, not Oliver, later Oliver, the film Oliver, the musical Oliver. I was around then with him. But Oliver Twist and then Bridge Over the River Kwai, and then Lawrence of Arabia, and then later into as you went into the 60s, Dr. Zhivago. He did those types of films. And then,
how big were those crews?
Oh, they were mainly UK crews, money from America, but always English crews. With David, because David Lean was an editor in his earlier career, he, I suppose, out in Jordan and Morocco, on Lawrence and things, the crews would be 100, 120 people. But you were in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't get on the internet and, you used to have to go and stop a boat and stop a boat in a dock and see what was on it to find the food.
Well, so how did you do it? How did you do it?
Well, when he died in 1969, I was working, and I had, for him, it wasn't something that I did that much work with him, but I did in the last 2 years that he was alive. I'd learned to drive, and I was allowed to go, and I'd learned to cook. That's maybe more important. I did actually spend some time. I learnt to cook. I went to Westminster Catering College, It's very interesting little story there. You see, even the teachers work for my father. Which I love the idea of. That, and unfortunately, when Dad died, he in '69, that I was still doing top of a few days at college, and I stopped going to college. I'd learnt enough to know, let's go to work here and make something of it. But people, there was a wonderful teaching chef called René Leprance, massive man, really old-fashioned, marvellous chef, cooked for hundreds of thousands of people. Said, we've got 1,000 people, cook for, here's the food, cook it. He taught me. And so I understand that part of it, how to get it done and how long it takes. The buying of food came naturally. I couldn't do a deal. It's all about doing a deal, of making sure that the supply line, it doesn't matter if you're in India, South America, Africa, the Far East, you have to get the supply line to work. And that's what I learnt basically from my father and some of his staff, how Dad used to do it. And I used to go out on recce's and early and go to the catering colleges in India especially, where they did have catering colleges, and say, grow me it. You don't have it. The markets have tons of food, but I've got to find certain things. Can you grow it? Yes, we'll grow it. I mean, I've even started a turkey farm in Delhi, but that's the turkeys. They were rough.
Bite your hand off?
No, they were awful. They never fed enough. No, I bought the food for them to feed the turkeys 6 months before we went out on one thing or the other, and I think, I don't know what happened, but the turkeys were very thin. There's wonderful stories like that. Anyway, we look on.
But you did. How many films did you do?
I catered, set up. Wasn't there all of the time on all the films, but I think it's over 300 I set up, and quite a lot of them I catered. I was there for most parts of them, but all literally in 70 odd countries. And many of those countries I went back to time and time again. I got a name, I think, in America, if you want to go there and make a film, make sure you can look after the UK or an English or European. It became crews, because you can't send people into the middle of nowhere or possibly under canvas if they're not being fed properly, because there wasn't anything. Most of the countries, there wasn't anything. But it's there, you've got to find it. I mean, even the last days of Russia, being the whatever Russia was called, I can't even think. I mean, the last days of Brezhnev and people. I went out on a recce on quite a big film for an American production company, and there was nothing. You couldn't buy food. And then for some obscure reason, they wanted to give me the food that was being served in their big studios. And then there was a complaint that the studios had no food because they were sending it to me. You can't starve one lot of people and give it to me. And it was crap anyway. It was rubbish. Awful food, awful essentials. And in the end, we just flew everything in every day from London. Raw. Straight from the market, straight onto the plane. And I got a pass to go onto the airport to pick it up. Straight off the British Airways flight. Thank you very much. It was like the Savoy. To go back slightly to the beginning of me, there is when my father was alive, he the last year of his life, I drove him. And I think the company were doing catering in many countries, but there was one film that came up that I went down to feed the young. I was a young man, 17, to feed the construction crew in Malvern, East Nor Castle, and it was a wonderful. It was a break. It's the first film I did, me and one person. My sidekick at the time, Billy Appleby, he and I went there, and we were there for weeks and weeks and weeks. Prior to that, I did do another film with my father. I went to Sherborne School and did Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and saw my uncle, the leading star, Peter O'Toole. He isn't my uncle, but he was known as Uncle Peter, because I knew him from when I was a kid, when my father was on Lawrence. Okay, so it's a funny old business. We were all introduced and quite close. I suppose my father had spent a year in the desert with him, so that's why he was always very kind to me. Mad as a hatter. You can't have a drink with him when he was alive. But anyway, so I spent a few months in Sherborne feeding the boys in Goodbye, Mr. Chips in the evening. And then I went from there. My first film that I looked after was a film called One More Time. And you don't do this, in life you don't meet people straight out of the bag. These were big American stars. And it was Rat Pack, parts of the Rat Pack. And we had Sammy Davis, Peter Lawford. Don't know about Peter Lawford. He wasn't. But Sammy Davis was wonderful. And directing was his old sidekick, Jerry Lewis, the comedian. And you don't spend 14 weeks of your young life feeding those people. You know, in a comedy which was based in England. You know, this was something that in the late 60s, 70s, they made films like that. You wouldn't get it made today, but they got it made because of who they were. And what a wonderful way, you know, if you didn't want to film, he didn't film, and we all went home. And we were paid ridiculous amount of money, all right, compared with the rest of the world, for doing what we did. And what an exciting time. And it went on from there. And then my father died, and the company was very quiet. And then we started to pick up things, and you know, it was a very strange time in England, I think, at any rate. There's a lot of films that I made a point of saying, let's not work in England. Okay, because it was quite depressing at the time. We did a lot for the BBC.
Oh, right.
And my early years spent doing children's television for the BBC, which was fantastic. They always came back to us, and the crews were a good size, so you could make a living out of it. And it went all over England. I mean, that's why I know England quite well, because we'd go on location to the most obscure little places in England and be paid for it. Great fun. You know, you go to the local shops and suppliers, and it was like a breath of fresh air, really. But most of the time, we aimed to do films overseas. And luckily, I had some good people working that stayed with the company from my father's time. My mother looked after it was a family company. My mother looked after the office in England, and I got on a plane and went all over the world, setting up, catering for the productions that we had managed to get eventually as they came to England, crewed up and went to Africa or India and I spent 30 years doing it, so I must have been quite good at it. And then look, there are films and times you actually go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, but because they were really awful to do, difficult.
Difficult people or
people.
Challenging scenarios?
Difficult places, and you could be on a hiding for nothing. But you did it, and you got through it, and no, you never said you couldn't do it. too much money involved. Okay, and once you got into the swing of making these films and living the lifestyle of getting on a plane and living in a 5-star hotel somewhere in some desolate place or a tent, it's a way of life, and you had to make it good for them. So I suppose I was really the testing case. Go out and see if it's workable. Early days, I did a film called The Man That Would Be King. And what a wonder. I think out of all the films that I had the pleasure of working on, The Man That Would Be King goes down as really one of the nicest films I can remember I'd ever worked on. It was in Morocco and Marrakesh and Ouarzazate, not a nice place, and then further down into the desert, Tenerife, for quite a few months. And prior to that, I had been in the desert. I did The Little Prince in Tunisia. So I was, I was 20.
Wow.
And I was feeding a full American musical shot in the Tunisian desert.
Why you say people were difficult? Why were they difficult?
People.
Was it to do with your age?
No, they weren't difficult with me.
Right.
You could be on a film that wasn't a happy film. Those films were happy. Little Prince, fantastic. I mean, you had fantastic stars in these, absolutely extraordinary people to which you, and they ate with you. They came and queued up like everybody else, simply because there was nowhere else to go. I'm not saying they would have gone to their caravan and be waited on. You can't do it. But they were fantastically, they were into making the movie. Today it's just the job. I loved film. I loved the whole idea of it, of how they put it together. I watched some of the best art directors and designers and costumers working from a distance, but knew them pretty well as associates. And we were all one. It was a team of people. You may be feeding them, but it's still a team of people. And that team of people were put together by quite clever people, quite clever production people. They knew what worked. There was a secret to actually who you put together. Luckily, I was very lucky. I worked for everybody. I worked for all the majors, okay? And the reason for that is they trusted the company, myself, my company, and my people, the people who worked for me, to do the job, all right, which was to look after the people that cost a fortune to be there. Why would you be standing in the middle of the desert watching Howard Keel sing about the Little Prince? I mean, I hadn't even heard of the Little Prince, the Petit Prince, before, and it's a French nursery rhyme basically, and they made it into a musical. It was the last of the big musicals. Howard Keel was possibly one of the biggest stage stars in the world, but I'm standing 300 miles from anywhere, a desert all around it, watching this guy sing the song. And you think, no one's ever going to see this again.
Yeah.
And
a real privilege.
Oh yeah, and some of the biggest actors you could ever see playing the parts of the dream of the Little Prince brings alive.
Yeah.
Dance routines in the middle of the desert. You think, I've seen it all now.
Wow. And at that time as well.
This is the early days.
Yeah.
But going back to spring forward another year, in Morocco on The Man That Would Be King. I mean, what a delight! You had one of the biggest directors in the world, John Huston. On day one, or before day one, he said to me, "I bet we won't get any salt beef." And Michael Caine said, well, if anybody can get it, he will, pointing at me. And Connery, putting his 2 pence worth in, charming man. There's a couple of stories for him there. But, these were massive stars.
Of course.
Okay? There's a star that no one ever knew, and I only ever worked with, I think 3 times, was an Indian actor called Saeed Jeffrey. Okay? If you said about 10 years later, if you said, Saeed's in the film, you'd know him. But no one knew Saeed then, and he plays a part in that film. And he never left the kitchen. I mean, he'd never been on a big location before, right, out of India, I don't think. But what a fantastic setup of people, and big numbers, huge British crew. John Foreman, who was the producer, fantastically charming man. Okay, he was fascinated. I'd never worked for him before, but I did 3 more films as the caterer for him. And then unfortunately he went back to America some years later, and he didn't live that much longer. But brilliant producer, charming man. I could say that about all producers. My father had run-ins with people like Sam Spiegel on Lawrence and a few other films over the years. Unfortunately, I worked in London on Sam Spiegel's last film. And he knew I was doing what my father did. And he was so difficult and so unwelcoming. It was, I can't remember the name of the film. I might have to look it up. But it was all shot in some very, very small house in London. And you look at it, and I remember the day he arrived on set in his grey Rolls Royce, this big old grey. He drove up, parked blocking the road in West London, got out, looked at me, didn't say anything, and walked to the set and shouted at people. And I thought, well, he hasn't changed. You talk about producers. There's some charming ones, but they're not there to be nice, or they can do it the nice way, or they are pretty foul. And I think the hit men of today try to be nice, but don't have the talent. I think they leave it to their underlings to do the nasty bits. I think there is talent there, obviously, but I can't say because I've stopped doing it. But there is a way of being quite charming about things.
So
Whatever
what did you do? So what happened? So you were a caterer for 40 years, and then
I was a caterer for I did 30 plus years of it. And then the last 10 years, I decided that I was working for the staff, a different world. The end of the 80s, the world had changed, the big roll of change, and anybody thought they could do anything. And the world was changing. And the requirements, yes, I had competition, I had a lot of competition, quite good competition, and fantastic. And there were a lot of films being made, but I lost the buzz. And I'm openly happy to say that. Wasn't enjoying it. So I wrapped the company up. And what happened was I started working for Stanley. That's a bit of a strange relationship at the beginning, simply because why would he want me to work for him? I was still catering, still at that time when I started with Stanley.
What kind of work did you do for Stanley?
Well, I produced for Stanley. He asked me early days of the family side of things. I mean, basically, all right, I've got to, you can't go into this without saying right from the beginning. I worked for Stanley on many catering films.
You catered for him?
I catered for Stanley my father catered for Stanley right from the beginning, from Lolita. And I actually met Stanley on Lolita. That's how long I'd known Stanley. He did actually, funny enough, years later remember it. But the bottom line of that, we did a bit on Strangelove, not a lot, at the studio at Shepperton, funny enough. And then what really went on is we did Barry Lyndon. I was asked to do Barry Lyndon as a caterer, a big film. I mean, don't be under any illusions. They don't get any bigger than Barry Lyndon. It was, for its day, extraordinary. And I went on, my contract on Barry Lyndon was 6 weeks filming a love story in Ireland. 60 to 100 people. Well, it's easy enough. I'll go to Ireland. We went to Waterford, and in the middle of my first day there, I saw someone I knew very well called Brian Cook. And Brian was the location manager on that at the beginning. And Brian said, so first day we got 5,000 people, Phil. And I said, well, I don't know who's feeding them because we're not. I said, I've got one kitchen coming over and 2 crew. And he went, well, we'll see about that because that's ridiculous. And so he said, come with me, we'll go and see.
So how did that come? What, like,
well,
why did you only
it was
have
all
that?
lies. It's all, I mean, I had this, I said, that's my contract, 60 people for 6 weeks. Love story. Barry Lyndon, it's called. Thackeray. We ended up, day one, I had every kitchen I had in Ireland shipped over and all my crews. And day one in Waterford, we did 5,600 people.
Jesus.
Okay, in the pissing rain in Mrs. Glossop's field. And this was meant to be for 5 days. And then they can all go back to London. I think 10 weeks later, we were still doing it. That's how I know Stanley.
Wow.
Properly. Because there was a few, I mean, it was a nightmare. We had our call every morning at 3 o'clock. Our call in the morning at 3 o'clock. Doug Twiddy would phone me and say, Phil, we're going to get ready to go to the Mrs. Glossop's field, which is only about 10 miles down the road with it. I'd go out to our base was at the old Garda barracks in Waterford. There was, as far as you could see, people. This is 3 o'clock in the morning. We're going to the field. Everybody everything was loaded on. And we get there and you start preparing it, and then a change of call. It's one kitchen to go, I don't know, it was about 60 miles away to the cottage where Barry Lyndon was filming Barry Lyndon and his mother, or something, I forgot. And you'd end up throwing every bit of food away. And this went, or taking it to the convents. I mean, we did it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, and the same call every day, and it would change. Eventually, they got it filmed in the bloody mud. And it was extraordinary. I came on it for 6 weeks, and 2 years later, I was still there.
Wow.
In that period of time, I met your mother.
Yeah.
Okay, which was fine. And my trouble was Stanley didn't think it was fine. And I was pulled in front of the judge. in front of every peer in my business, in the business, who was working on for a short period of time, or every production person you can think of, they are going, Philip, you can't do this. I said, do what? Okay. And in the end, I was really told off by Stanley. You can't go out with my daughter. I said, it's not me. I said, do you honestly think I can afford to go out with your daughter? Okay. And that's all I said. She was sent away. What a shame. Terrible, isn't it? But it's fact. By that time we'd left Waterford and gone to Dublin, and then it folded because all of a sudden we were asked very quietly, very hush-hush, we're not filming tomorrow, not filming tomorrow. I knew why we weren't filming tomorrow, because Stanley had gone to London, to England, because it's the time of the threats and bomb threats.
IRA.
The IRA. And I was discreetly told that we're moving. And we moved. I flew out and went back to London, and then arranged for a kitchen to go down to Salisbury. Went to Salisbury. We started at Wilton House. And by 6 weeks ended up being 2 years. And we were still in Somerset, Glastonbury. I think the last day's shooting on Barry Lyndon that I can recall, except for the German shoot, which Jan did. And it's funny how you remember the hotels but not the towns. The Red Line at Somerton. And we filmed at Somerton at an old house. And then we came back, 6 months later, and went to Lavenham and do the terrible scene, the scene with where his legs blown off and he's lying and he's dying in a house in Lavenham. Go out with a big bang. The scene in Lavenham, in the square at Lavenham, there's 600 crowd.
Wow.
Had to be fed. I went up there and I was told, we've got 600 crowd, Phil. I said, well, why doesn't anybody talk on this, Phil? 2 years later, no one's learnt the lesson. Tell the truth and it can be done easily. Never do. But that's how I got to know Stanley. Anyway, years passed, and I was working in Pinewood on Batman. Oh no, hold on, beg your pardon. I was working at Pinewood on Supergirl and also doing Batman. Crowds, feeding crowds on the back lot. And I get a call from an old pal of mine saying, you're coming down to the bar? I said, why? He said, there's someone here who wants to see you. And I said, I'll be down in a little while. And you know the biblical story of the Red Sea parting for the Israelites? Well, it was quite strange. I walked through the restaurant part of the bar into the bar, and it's full of crowd artists. Hello, Philip. And all got a little funny face on. And it was like the parting of the waves in the Red Sea. And at the end of this gaggle of crowd artists, packed it was, is Catherine.
Wow.
And that's how we re-met.
Wow.
And I've never forgotten that.
Because she was
working in an art department. She was the art
Supergirl.
In Supergirl. And I didn't know. I didn't even realise that. And I had seen her once in 10 or 12 years. And I thought, where did I see her? She was doing a film at Shepperton, and I was there doing something else. And I was called into the studio because the production was called into their set. And what actually happened, from that day, 3 weeks later, I was getting divorced, and we made a pact. I would tell my ex-wife, Susie, or sister's mum, and she would tell Stanley and Christiana that we were getting married on the same day. And could I come for Christmas? Look, he loved Christmas, Stanley. And that's basically what happened. It was very traumatic, the whole thing. But anyway, we moved into London, I did come for Christmas. I bought I bought all the food. I remember arriving with a G-Wagon full of food.
Of course.
That's what I do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he was very funny. He was very, very funny. And he was very actually was very happy. How I ended up working for him was another thing altogether. I mean, you could tell all the stories I'm telling you now of who I'd worked with, and there are hundreds of people, thousands of people. I knew everybody, and what he quite liked about that was because I knew everybody, he presumed I knew who was any good. And I knew how the business works, and I did know a lot of people. The interesting part about Stanley's thoughts was instantly he could be more useful than anybody who was in production, because not only does he know how it works, he knows every department, because I stood there, as I said at the beginning, you watch, you absorb the art directors, the costume designers, the wardrobe ladies, the hairdressers, the makeup people, everybody, the cameramen. You befriend the cameraman.
So who was the most influential to you of those people? So if you observed...
To be honest with you, I was always interested in the art direction side, but I always wanted to be in production. At some stage I thought, I mean, when you've been actually catering for people and you're told to do something, you begin to question if the decision was right. I shouldn't say that. I had a lot of peers who taught me a lot in the production side all my life, and wonderful people. But there's some very dodgy people as well who didn't know.
And they were dodgy because they just didn't know.
Well, they just didn't know. They're winging it.
Right.
They're winging it. It costs... After the first Star Wars and Bridge Too Far, I give you for instance, I was asked by the same producer of Star Wars to go to Afghanistan to cater a film. Blimey, Afghanistan. The Russians had the Russians hadn't gone in. It was the only part in, I think, Afghan history they weren't at war. And we went there. It was lovely. I adored it. I thought this is the most wonderful place in this part of the world I'd ever been. I loved the Afghans. They were... Look, you're asked to do a job which is virtually impossible because we were filming on the Russian border in a place called Tashkent, in a earthquake, just had a huge earthquake there, region. But the meetings with remarkable men, this was called. It was about Gurdjieff, who was, if you were living in France, you'd know him. He's a god. People worship him. He's a guru. And they funded this film to be made about his life. And this is serious stuff. So pick up the crew of the first Star Wars, camera crew, designer, everybody, and the production department, and that was the next job they did.
Wow.
Think about it. Star Wars hadn't come out then. While we were making meetings with remarkable men, and we were sitting in a camp in Tashkent, which I built with the location manager. Okay. Star Wars came out, it was a huge hit. So everybody there's very happy. Party mode. They're all on party mode. But, oh Christ, they did drink. But we set up bars. This is a Muslim country. I used to bring in donkey trains from the Russian embassy full of whiskey and bottled beer, but not in. You've got to remember, and wine to cater, because it was 24-hour catering.
Wow.
But we boarded in. They used to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning into Kabul, and I got a tap on the door from the German owner of this little hotel saying, "You've got a shipment in." It's all illegal. Go and pay the man out in dollars, and all of a sudden you've got, I don't know, enough booze to sink the Titanic or something. But then you had the problem of taking it from Kabul. This is little ideas of its logistics. How do you get, because what they do, they unload them, individual bottles. You got a line of bottles, 1,000, 2,000 bottles. I'm looking at this, no boxes. They've all come in panniers on, illegally from the Russian border. So you think, how are we going to get them to Tashkent? Because it's a couple of truckloads. Mm. I went to what was then the only soft drink company in the world that had decent soft drinks. It was Coca-Cola. Mm. And I rented their Coca-Cola delivery trucks.
Wow.
Had some boxes made which were heavier than the contents, solid armoured. And they went over in Coca-Cola trucks, disguised as Coca-Cola, to the camp.
Wow.
But it was a hit. I mean, and
that all came about because, you were getting elbows like, come on, Phil.
I was told by the production, we got to keep them happy. And that's what we did. But I arranged 2 trucks, which there was no ice. Ice was at the top of the Hindu Kush Mountains. You'd go through the Hindu Kush Mountains. You go in at 40 degrees as you climbed up to the tunnel that went through the Hindu Kush Mountains, which the Russians had built. We built, so overnight I would have one truck going one way and one truck going the other. And I panelled and had tanks at the bottom. And what we'd do, we'd leave with ice, big blocks of ice and all the food, because you went from 40 degrees leaving Kabul to 20 degrees below zero in the mountains. This is lower Himalayas, the Hindu Kush, bit chilly. And you come out in the middle of the tunnel into an open area, and it was snowdrifts. The ice by that time had melted, so the driver had to load on loads of snow, cover it all with snow to keep it fresh overnight, all right, and then go down, and you go down below sea level into 40 degrees to Tashkent, to the Russian border, where the camp was. And that's exactly what we did every day for 5 weeks.
And
I made that up. I got there, I thought, I've got to make this work. But that was absolutely fantastic member of the royal family of Afghanistan, owned a modernish supermarket in Kabul. He could get anything. He knew, but the royal family had gone some years ago, had been assassinated. My interpreter, when I got there, was an absolutely charming kid who had been American educated. Oh, sorry, London educated. She was the ambassador, the Iranian ambassador's daughter. While we were there, her father was assassinated, and we had to ship her out. So we lost her. We sent her. We put her on a plane because she would have been. This was the start of, just towards the end of the Russians slowly moving in, and the end of the Shah of Iran. It was the first assassination of all his mates around the world. But anyway, the point of it is, she knew this guy who ran, or the brothers that owned this supply chain. Mm. And they used to get most of it from the embassies. Mm. All right? The British embassy, you could walk into the British embassy, there wasn't even a soldier at the guard, but they were useless. They didn't do anything to help. They were charming. You could go there and play ping pong. This is the British Empire at its best. It's the only place in the world we never conquered, you've got to remember. Afghanistan, first time and second time. But it's a very interesting setup. We found a supply just by chance. This guy, he showed me what he could give me, and it was bits of but fantastic meat. And it was all coming in from the Swiss embassy. Stolen and then sold to, but he'd buy it off a third party. But it was all being, and we'd buy it. Look, I don't care. At that time, it was let's get hold of the stuff. We have to buy it, but it's got to be a perfectly sound transaction. Okay, from him to us, bills, lovely, and it's got to completely work for 10 weeks. He did it. He pulled it off. He'd load these trucks with everything that I sent. The truck that came back over the mountains empty. He'd had a new list of the stuff I wanted, fresh vegetables, anything you could think of. And then he would return with fresh milk and fresh everything and fresh eggs from Kabul the following morning, having loaded with snow halfway through the night. Got to Tashkent. They were never late. They never, ever were late, all right? And you'd unload it, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, cook an English breakfast for the unit and serve them roast beef and Yorkshire pudding at lunchtime. And that was done the whole time they were there, and an evening meal in the camp and lots of booze.
Did you ever have a disaster?
Oh.
Where it all fell apart?
I was asked to do Christmas lunch for the whole crew and the Indian crew on Gandhi. Now, you've got to remember, we'd been filming for 3 months every day. So my lot were a little worn out. So I said, okay, I will arrange the Christmas lunch, but my crew have got to have a day off, Christmas off. I'll do it through the Sheraton Hotel. We got the turkeys, okay, and I arranged...
These are the really thin ones?
Well, no, not those ones. I managed to get some turkeys. I won't even talk about where we got the turkeys from. But we got the turkeys, and they were quite good turkeys. I even asked, like the London office, if they could actually do a press thing to get one of the big turkey companies in England to fly out the turkeys as an advert, but they wouldn't do it. Well, they would do it, but British Airways wanted to charge a fortune for flying them. Yes, anyway, we got the turkeys and we gave them to the chef at the Sheraton Hotel to prepare the menu and everything else. I went home went back to the hotel Christmas Eve. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, went back to the Sheraton. And I went to walk into, we were taking over the Chinese restaurant on the roof. And overnight, they dug a hole in the service platform between the kitchen, gone through the concrete. And I get there, well, how are we going to get the food from there to there? And then I went into the kitchen and the turkeys weren't there. They'd taken them to another kitchen in the hotel and they deboned them and marinated them in pineapple juice. And I'm looking at this thinking, well, that's fucks it completely. I mean, so I got hold of my interpreter, Mr. Bakshi, and said, where's the chef? Oh, he's gone. He said, he knows. What did he do? Food through the floor? I mean, what's this all about? We got 300 people coming here in 5 hours' time for Christmas lunch. I'm looking at these turkeys, and oh, God help us. They weren't even in the fridge. So I said, they've got to be in fridge. You know, you can't marinate it without the fridges. He said, the fridges aren't working. This is the 5-star hotel, best hotel in Delhi. I said, well, find some bloody, I'll get our fridges brought round. Anyway, we got them in there, and anyways, basically, it was a disaster. Every member of the crew was ill. No one had been ill for months. None of us, I'm there to make sure they're not ill. We filter the water. We did it. Everything's in refrigeration. Everything is covered. I built a special kitchen for the English unit on that film to go to India with fly screens and extractor fans that took out the heat and blew in cold. You've never seen a performance, this is on Gandhi, to get it absolutely proper. None of the Indian food on the Indian kitchen, all right, which I handpicked the crew on, bought a chef from Saudi Arabia, from the King of Saudi Arabia, and got permission for him to come and cook, because he was a really good cook from the Indian kitchen, okay, which all is quite true, okay, and that man actually worked for me on 5 other films. But he used to have to get permission to come to work for Mr. Phillip. Anyway, everything there, the one day we didn't do it, the whole bloody unit's ill. Even Dickie. I'll go in, it's not my fault. I didn't know what to say. I really didn't know what to say. That was one thing, but I think that was a disaster. The only other disaster, and they locked me in a room because I was so annoyed about it, and this was not my fault, was the cakes, the magic mushroom cakes on Bridge Too Far. Some clever little actor decided to get the bakery to make. Someone at the bakery paid him a lot of money to put magic mushrooms in our order. And the whole crew were climbing lampposts, and the producer's drivers camped out in the middle of a motorway with the producer in the back seat. I mean, there are 5 people on heart machines. Certain actor, he was in Barry Lyndon.
Wow.
Mr. O'Neill. Never did like that. They actually called me to the office because I didn't know I was out with the other unit. With lots of units.
How did you know it was him?
I got to the bottom of it.
Right.
I had a sneaking feeling. Anyway, they called me to the office, and then I heard the key. They locked me in the producer's office. He said, Eric would like a word with you. I said, fine. Where's Eric? Go in, Eric. Hi, Phil. Have a seat. I'll be back in a minute. Went out and locked me in. What the fuck's going on?
Because they thought you'd done it? Or?
Well, they wanted to get to the bottom of it. I said, you're kidding me, aren't you? And I said, I'll tell you who that is. And I was right. But they never pressed charges. Dutch police didn't press charges. The people on the crew wanted to press charges, but on me. You should never let this happen. And they knew it wasn't me, and they knew it wasn't my crew, but he got away with it.
Wow.
Anyway, the man's not with us anymore. But we had him. He thought things like that were funny.
If you were to give your 14-year-old self some advice,
yeah,
what do you think you'd say?
I do what you did for the first 20 years. Take out a pension, which I did do, but I think the Labour government took that away. Do exactly the same thing up until I stopped catering.
So you would have kept, even though you lost the spark, you would have kept doing it?
No, I would have done something else. I would have, that first 25 years, I mean, you tell me, I mean, I could be working for all of the majors at one time. Marvellous, all fantastic opportunities. It was, you were called in to do things that you'll never be asked to do again. They don't do it anymore. They just don't do it. Those opportunities have gone. Okay, and it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic to be able to have the opportunity to do it. Marvellous. I'm not saying that I wouldn't do the last part of my career in the film industry again. I might do it in a slightly different way. And unfortunately, Stanley died when he died. I'd left, but at the time, but prior to that. But we understood why. I had a great time working with him. Difficult, it was a lesson. There was a lesson learned. I wouldn't do. There are things I wouldn't do in the middle of it. Don't marry in the industry, for one. Because they hold it against you. I mean, and in England, you can't be successful. That's one of the problems in England. If you're successful anywhere else in the world, people enjoy people's success. In England, it's jealousy. And that I found destroying, if that's the right, they destroy you.
Tell me about collaborating with, you've got all these different kinds of makers and creators and all these different kinds of people that on a film set, but then you've also got your crew that you have to work with and collaborate and make it happen and keep everybody happy. Like it is, as you keep saying, it's about feed the camera, keeping everybody happy, and food. As
a caterer, that's what we did.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not saying you're going to win every day, and there's boredom and there's frustration. Get set in, and people, the first thing they're going to yell at is the tea boy, because his runner hasn't bought him a cup of tea for the last 10 minutes.
So did you get used to that? Do you think that was a big?
I think you can get round things like that,
But you must have almost sort of trained you for being yelled at all the time.
I went to boarding school. You become from a timid little boy, you become fairly hardened to the fact that actually, why did I end up as head boy? Because basically they beat the shit out of you, and that's not very good. My mother once said to me, if I hadn't sent you, or we hadn't sent you to boarding school, you'd never been able to have done what you've done in your life, because you had the nerve and you knew how to put things together. And I think she may have been right. I mean, the one thing that is fend for yourself. I mean, 8-year-old children going away to school is not very nice, but you fend for yourself in the end. And I hated it. And all I ever wanted to do was leave school. But if I told you the reason I left school at the age I left was because I wrote my father a letter, and I think it was the first letter he'd ever received that hadn't got a spelling mistake in it, asking him, say, look, I'm 15, I'm allowed to leave school now, I want to learn to cook and I want to come and do what you do. And basically, he got the letter and he said, I think it started, don't waste your money anymore.
Right.
Because I'm not going to pass any of these exams. And he took it seriously. He said, okay, right, come and see what it's really like in the wide world. And
what did he want for you?
He wanted me to do what he did. He built a company, and he basically wanted the company would have been, if my father had been alive, it would have carried on it would have become quite a big, I think their plans had changed slightly after he died. I mean, he had plans, we had several companies and they were all in catering. He started a new company just before he died, which was very successful, which my sister ran for many years. But it was a catering company. But, what I wanted to do with location caterers was work on movies, big movies. I just love movies. And I learnt, I'm not saying I learnt how to do everybody's job, but I had I saw who was good and who made the mistakes. Who won the Oscars? Bloody marvellous, Or I could talk to people and ask how they did that. Or watch people, or watch set dressers set, or cameramen telling lighting cameraman, DOPs, telling electricians, their best boys, where to put things and how to lay it out. You don't forget it. You know, the dean of all cameramen really was Stanley. I mean, whatever, you know, John Alcourt was a fantastic cameraman, but he learned his trade from the two best people in the world. One was Stanley, and one was the man who lit 2001, who was possibly the best cameraman in the world. And Stanley learned a lot from him, and he would always say it's the nicest man in the business. Stanley would say he was the nicest man in the business. But you know that man, when I was working in Canada on Superman 1, someone from his crew moaned about the food. And he heard it because he was in the queue, lunchtime. And he pulled him out the queue, I don't know, he was the second camera loader or something. He said, now you listen to me. This man, pointing at me, and his father have fed me all over the world. And the reason he's here is because I know there won't be any problem. So you mind you and apologise. What he is serving you is a huge choice of food, cooked the way you want it, and it's on time. And we can all go back to work on time. That guy never said another word, because this cameraman was a 3 Oscar-winning cameraman who people absolutely idolised. But Stanley thought he was the nicest man in the world. But he, you know, and to get Stanley to actually agree that a cameraman was any good was unbelievable. And I'd introduced Stanley after that to 10 others. But Stanley was the one who lit. He was very clever.
But they could, I mean, obviously there were no monitors, it was all on film. I'm used to shooting on monitors and being able to see and light something actually. But, you know, you can light it with meters and it just be perfect, like a picture, like a painting, like Barry Lyndon, you know.
But you can do film, you know. Is it as good as film? I don't know.
Well, it's a different age.
Film's coming back.
Yeah. Well, it's still, you know, all the big boys, you know, they're still shooting on film when they can, when there's the budget for it, because it's so expensive now. I mean, were you ever anxious?
The first day of any film, or the first day of catering, I found the only way to get over that, I mean, I never used to go to bed the night before. I used to have a little bit of a party and go straight to work. But I think because if I didn't relax, having put it all together, I don't know, I'm just one department in 25 departments in a film crew. You just are the one that has to keep them all together. Because the first thing they moan about will be the food if they're not being looked after. You know, anxious. Go to a union meeting and listen to people. The first thing they'll attack would be food. And it could be, you could have the best chef in the world. The first thing the unions would be moaning about, I mean, I always remember a shop steward standing up and saying, years and years and years ago, why don't we get any fish? This was in Ireland on Alfred the Great. Why don't we get any fish? What did you have for lunch today? Salmon. This is in 1968 or something. He was getting a fresh salmon steak caught the day before and served to him freshly cooked on a location. Because it was Friday in Ireland. Only fish on Friday in Ireland. But you had to give them fish. He said, we never get this. You've just eaten a whole salmon steak in front of us. He didn't even know what a piece of salmon was. You know, there are a few thick people. Very strange enough, that man became a great friend and was highly admired by Stanley because he was a prop man who was really good. He was a standby prop on years later on Barry Lyndon, and right the way up, he was going to be standby prop on. He wanted to dress it. He didn't want to be standby anymore. But he was going to do the Full Metal Jacket, and he unfortunately died. Maxie, his name was. Great guy, great pop. But they want to become stop. When in his youth, he was the shop steward, and he was an animal. It's, you know, everybody stopped for a meeting. You know, you think, God, blimey.
The collaborating, as you said at the beginning, like the producers who put all of these people together were, in a way, artists.
Not necessarily producers. It's production managers. In England, you'd get an American producer come in. You know, we're a service industry. The English film industry was a service industry to America. Whatever you say. But sorry, the English film industry was a service industry for America to film the rest of the world. Americans didn't go to Africa. Americans didn't go to India. They would come to England to put a crew together, to put production people on it, who were pretty good, who would put a crew together to go to India or to go to Africa to make a film. You'd have American actors, and you would have American, maybe specialists. Today, you've got lots of Americans because of the financial way of making films in England. But Carl Foreman, one of the biggest producer-directors of all time. He made great films. My father and him didn't ever see eye to eye. Carl Foreman was a clever guy. He made Guns of Navarone and many others. But Guns of Navarone was a difficult film to do because a lot of it was on the water. My father catered that. And there was a relationship between the two of them, but they would always argue about something. There was always and it was an all English crew, a few American actors, European actors, but it was shot on roads, and the cost of things then were beginning to get quite expensive. Years after my father died, I worked and met him on Young Winston, which was just after my father died, and it was the first film I did for Dickie Attenborough. But Carl put me under his arm because he remembered my father very well. He was a great supporter for me because I'd just lost Dad. Okay, Dad had died the year before, and he was quite shocked by that. And I was quite young, but he would. He and his wife, funny enough, befriended me. A big film. I only did the Welsh part of it because I wasn't seen old enough and clever enough at the time to go and do the Moroccan part. So my crew, one of my crews, and in fact Len Needer, who worked for my father in the office, went out and did the Moroccan part. But that's another story. But the production crew on that particular film was made up of some fairly big names, but with slightly iffy lot in the film industry. And it became a bit of a joke because it was Barnsby, Beckett and Buck. Oh, what a... And they were a nightmare. I mean, they couldn't make a decision if they had a meeting about it. But Foreman was actually, it was a big film, hundreds of people. Dickie Attenborough was second film as a director. But we got through that film without my old man, and it worked. But I did a couple of other things for Carl Foreman, And what I thought was going to be someone I would be able to get on with, I got on with extremely well as a young person. And why he was that way with me, I don't know. But he taught me a lot. Christ, did he teach me a lot in a very short period of time. I went to his funeral, and his wife, up until she died, I kept in touch with. She was nice people. But that's a very rare. I mean, he was a very, very big, controversial producer. Made a lot of films. I remember Stanley wasn't too fond of him. I don't know, that was before me. I remember talking about it, Carl, and he said, "Oh, really?" But there you go.
Incredible.
See, Dickie Attenborough was very loyal, but he was never loyal to my father. Why? We didn't do Dickie's first picture, and very few films that Dickie was in did my father do, because he was. I don't know what that was about, but then the production people he used me, and I did all his films except for the last couple. Very clever producer, by the way. He was, in my mind, a better producer than director, but look, I'm just a T-boy. Anybody who could have put Gandhi together as a co-production between English, American and Indian government money is a clever producer. Very clever. He opened India up.
Your time in the film industry, do you have any regrets or things that you wish that you'd done that you didn't?
After I produced with Stanley, I went back and did some more catering, which I shouldn't have done, because it was made very hard for me. So that was a slight mistake, and I wish I hadn't done that. I was also at the same time after that asked by the Warner's rep in London if I would do a Fred Zinnemann film as the producer, and I turned it down. And a couple of other things I turned down, and I should have gone. I knew Mr. Zinnemann, highly respected Mr. Zinnemann. Wasn't financially successful, I'm afraid, in his last few movies. I did do his last movie as a caterer, 5 days one summer, up in Samaritz. Okay, and Sean Connery. Yes, I could tell you a story about that, but I'm saving that one. Saving the golfing stories. I'll hold that one back for a moment. But no, I regret not doing. I should have carried on. The reason I didn't, I was being loyal to Stanley, because he said every time I went away, or why are you doing that? Or go, but how long are you going to be? And the minute I got to wherever I was going, be it catering or whatever, when are you coming back? I need you here. This I've found quite frustrating. 1, 2, I couldn't afford to do it. 3, it went on for too long. We were going to make a film. I mean, in the period that the Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, which I spent 2 years on before I was ill and left, I started working on 4 or 5 other films for Stanley, one of which we were 8 weeks away from filming and it folded. And then it was very difficult. It was a very difficult time. My loyalties were there, my, how can I put it, my devotion to him was waning. Because you can't live. I had a family of 4, as you know, and I found it quite frightening. So there's the mistakes. I should have done Zinnemann's another film, but as a producer, or I did go to Russia to produce another film, which didn't happen for someone else. There was a mistake. You make mistakes. You were very lost. And I was in the middle of when Stanley died, I got divorced, and it became very difficult. I mean, I think some forget what had gone on before. It's up to them. I'm just a tea boy. That's all I will say. But if you want to make something work, I'll make it work.
Clearly. Well done.
You make it. You just make it work, and you make it work to the best ability. And you need money to do that, but that's really doesn't work for people who don't have any money. There's another one. Or if you don't have control of it, and you're not quite in the right position to do it, don't go ahead. I mean, they're lessons. Don't fling money at something that you can't win with, because it doesn't work. Really be sure. Don't have partners. There's another one. Don't ever have a partner. At least
business partner.
Yeah, don't ever have a business partner. Be a limited company. You employ the people, pay the people, and tell them to go home when it's over. Do not have partners, because you can't win. I know that from my producing stakes with, as you know, and it doesn't work. And funny enough, early days, my father told me that, and my mother told me that, never have a partner, it doesn't work. The reason my father fell out with his original partner, who had the license to buy food, is that the poor old bugger became an alcoholic and died. I mean, that was in 1952, I think the year I was born. But, and that's when he didn't need the license as well, but he didn't feed the man with booze to actually kill him off. He unfortunately became an alcoholic because of the pain he was in from his wounds in the war. But that's, they were partners. I know who the bigger partner was the old man. There's lots more, but for another day.